And so we continue with God's word about Noah and his family and all of God's creation. The flood continued for 40 days on the earth, and the waters they increased, and they bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters swelled and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. The waters swelled so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters swelled above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all flesh died that moved on the earth. Birds, domestic animals, wild animals, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all the human beings. Everything on dry land, in whose nostrils was the breath of life. He blotted out everything that was on the face of the ground, human beings and animals and creeping things and birds of the air. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those that were on the ark with him. And the waters swelled on the earth for 150 days. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. It was this past week that my oldest brother's daughter, Becca, was married to Tyler Martin up in northwest Wisconsin. I wasn't able to attend, but I got a YouTube video of the wedding. But the winds, they come so strong that they beat the rains just sideways right into them all. But they didn't stop. They kept on moving forward with the ceremony. And everyone stayed put. They stayed there because of the celebration was happening. They stayed there because the vows were yet to be exchanged. The covenant needed to be completed with this bride and the groom. And as soon as the pronouncement was made, you're now husband and wife, and the kiss, and then they just dashed down the aisle into the reception tents, and everybody was suddenly a mad rush. And I watched the camera as it just panned across everyone, and I could hear a little bit of a pickup in a conversation that said, you see, it's like marriage, isn't it? There can be rains and there can be storms, but we keep on moving forward. We keep on trying the best we can. The camera stopped there, and I could see Anna, who's my next older brother's daughter, and she was there with her 5-year-old little girl. And I had a sudden flashback of 20 plus years ago with Amy. Amy was 5 back then, and I remember her being 5, and a day in which we were visiting my mother on Crystal Lake, and I decided to take Amy out on the sailboat. So we got on the boat. A beautiful day it was, the sun, and it was shining. It was a wonderful day to be out on the lake, and out we went until we get to the middle of the lake. And then, sure enough, those clouds come and the winds pick, and that boat was capsized, dividing us, splitting us. I was separated from her. My heart was beating. I was pounding. My breath was short. I was fearful. She had on a little life jacket, but even so, a little 5-year-old out there bobbing in the waves and fearful about what was going to happen. I went under the water, under the hull, and came up the other side, and there she was, big-eyed, and her lip was beginning to quiver. She was frightened, and tears started to come. And we swam around to the boat and got it flipped over and bailed out the water and got back in it and made our way home. But my heart was beating strong. I was anxious those moments when life can seem fragile, when everything dear to you just seems like it could be just changed and gone in a blink. Fearful moments, we have to come into that place where we can find a calm. How do we do that when we're soaked? When you're soaked by the rains and by all of the stuff that comes at you in life, how do you find that place of calm? How can you find that place but that you've been soaked in it before that moment? You've been seeped in it and soaked in it. It's like the Psalms do that for us. Here's one of those Psalms right here. It's number 37. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. It's a beautiful verse that you could say over and over again to yourself when you just let the Spirit of God soak into you. Soak into your very being. That's what that's about. Rest in the Lord. When you're resting in the Lord, it's that soaking in of His Spirit, just being with the Lord and being with the Lord in worship times and a devotion time and just being there and waiting on the Lord. That's a time of letting the Lord's Spirit just soak into your being. For when you need to draw upon that calm and that time when the storms of life are raging, that we call upon the Lord to then to find that center and that place of wellness again, just trusting that the grace of God, which is so amazing, will rescue us and save us and lift us to a new life. So rest in the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Something that I learned, take the cucumber out of the garden and you can put it into its brine and you can soak it to make pickles, but you know what happens when you put it in and soak it for just 5 minutes and take it out and you cut it up and you eat it? You know what you have? A cucumber. That's it. It's got to soak for a long while in the brine. It's got to soak for a week, 2 weeks, maybe more, in the spices, in the brine solution, until finally that cucumber really becomes a pickle, and then it tastes like one. You see, it's been transformed into something brand new. We're that way. We've got to be soaked in the Spirit of God, fully and thoroughly, regularly, soaked, resting in the Lord and waiting patiently for Him. And in that way, He'll do that work within us and create within us a very new creation, soaking in the Spirit. But it can be a violent thing. It can be a thing which is uncomfortable and which we would rather not have take place, because sometimes that transformation, in fact, oftentimes the transformation, it's really a storm that will bring about a change in our lives, in our world. It's only by a storm then that will come in and change the face of everything that finally we will relinquish ourselves and give into it and submit to another will other than our own. Only because the storm has come and it's so mighty and it's so powerful will allow a change to take place. God knew that in the days of Noah. It's going to take a storm and a mighty storm. But God saw within Noah one who walked with God, one who was steeped and soaked in God, like this other psalm. It's Psalm number 46. It's a psalm that you know toward the end of that psalm. Be still and know that I am God. For that psalm has storms that are raging within it. But then when we come to the end of the psalm, we're reminded once again, just be still and know that I am God. When the storms of life are raging, there can be a time for you, for me, to learn a new trust in God, to learn indeed that God is holding us and caring for us and bathing us and soaking us in baptismal waters that may threaten to destroy us through all the tumult, through all the strife. Just keep hearing the music. Keep hearing the music of that psalm, be still and know that I am God. Keep hearing the music of God's amazing grace. Keep hearing the music in which God has soaked you in and just held you within. And know that no storm can ever shake you. And so we sing.
How can I
the storm, was bringing the storm and preparing it to come upon the face of the earth, God looked over all of God's people, and there he saw Noah. There he saw Noah among all the people over the face of the earth. And God saw within Noah one who walked with God, one who knew God. Of all the descendants of all the people, of all the generations, it was Noah who walked with God. And so God could find within him that one who would be kept calm in the storm, who would be able to see all of God's creation through that storm. We're called to be the Noahs. God looks upon we, the disciples of Jesus the Christ, and looks to see for we who are people following in God, who are walking with God in our lives, who have at the very heart and core of our beings the Spirit of God because we've been soaked in the Spirit. We've come to know who Jesus the Christ is, who reminds us that he walks with us throughout all periods and times of life and teaches us to do the same so that we can be like that rock in this world. For when we watch the nightly news and read in the papers and we hear of airlines that are coming down out of the sky, being hit by missiles in times of war, when a private world and citizens who are going from one place to another with family, with grandchildren, physicians on board going to another place to bring aid to people who are hurting, and there from the very darkness of the hearts of men and women come a missile and takes an airliner from the sky. It is we, God's people, who need to find a place of walking with God to help this war-torn world to be centered and focused where it needs to be. To help us to know, indeed, that God has us in hand and that God calls us to a higher way of living, to a way in which peace is known, in which there is a moral ground that we are to walk on, that God called Noah and his family to. For they knew what that was because they walked with God. And they would be that influence for the new creation that would come to be, because they would show all of the descendants now how to be faithful, how to walk in a moral, upright fashion and way, to be God's people and all that God has intended it to be, when we might tend to give up hope or think that just the war will win, to think that all of the sickness will ravage humankind and we're never going to get on top of the hungers that seem to persist and the poverty that's there. But we are the people of God and Jesus who walk with God, who then help to soak the world in God's good graces. For that's who we are. His people soaked in his grace and his love and his mercies, so that we will help the world to know that. So that we come here on a Sunday morning being soaked in that grace and that glory, so that we can go forth from here sharing that with the world and making a difference and bringing transformation. It is ours to do, for God has saved us for this mission and this ministry. Yes, through the ark, but through the saving action of Jesus the Christ, who came through the storm of Golgotha to save you and to save me, to give us hope, to give the world hope. May we be soaked in God's good graces of his baptismal waters coming upon us, trusting in God for today, for tomorrow, for eternity. That through all of life then we would find that we would die to the old, we would be reborn into the new, a new creation happening in us and through us. May each of us be a part of that coming of the peace of Christ to all God's people.